might have saved a woman and her daughter from a nasty encounter in the Australian mountains. This happened about 4 years ago. Some backstory: I am from Australia and lived there during this event. At the time, my girlfriend, now wife, lived in another country, but was visiting me over Christmas break. I lived in a big city, which, if you drove about an hour in any direction, would either lead to another city or beautiful nature, in my opinion. My friends and I decided to take my girlfriend at the time to see some of this beautiful nature and decide on a national park about an hour and a half from where we lived. This place is definitely no sort of secret location. It's very well known, but there are a ton of different areas to it, with different rural and windy roads, taking you to the various areas of the park. We got into different cars, my friend in one, me and my girlfriend in another, to have some time together. We finished out the day of hiking and we're heading home down one of the less common roads. I remember seeing this really beat up old 70s sedan with a wild looking dude in the driver's seat drive past us in the other direction. This wasn't uncommon, as there are a lot of smaller, less economically sound sounds spattered around the area. But for some reason, him and his car stood out, and my girlfriend noticed it as well. About 200 meters further down the very windy road, there was a pull-off area. You could pull off to look at the view towards the ocean. There was a camper van belonging to a company that mostly rented out colorful vans to backpackers parked there, with a woman standing in front of it. As soon as she sees us, she jumps out onto the road and flags us down. Now, I've read enough of these subs to know pulling in to help her on a quiet road might not be the safest idea, but back then I hadn't, and my friends were in the car directly behind us. Luckily, she wasn't the person I didn't want to meet. She was quite obviously upset and scared when we pulled in. I told my girlfriend to wait in the car, and I got out to speak to her. She was almost in tears. I can't remember where she was, but it was probably like some Central European country from memory, touring around with her 4 or 5-year-old daughter. She told me her van had broken down, and she'd pulled off there and called the van company's assistance line and was waiting for help. By this time, my friends had pulled in behind us, and a couple of them had come over to see what was up. Apparently, a scary man had driven past her a few times already. First time pulling over to offer to take her and her daughter to the nearest town for help. She thanked him and said no, and that she was waiting for the assistance vehicle. He left, but then kept driving past every 10 to 15 minutes in opposite directions, slowing down and looking at them, then driving off. She begged us to stay with her while she waited for the assistance vehicle, because this guy terrified her and her daughter. I agreed. My friends, being the awesome people they are, decided me and my girlfriend were enough and they ditched us. Thanks, guys. We stayed with a woman for a little while before the car my girlfriend and I had seen drove past kinda slow, coming the opposite way we'd seen him the first time. As soon as he'd driven around the bend, the lady told us that that was the scary man that she'd been seeing before we got there. This got my girlfriend and I to take her much more seriously after the feeling we got from the guy just seeing him on the road before. A few minutes later, he came back from the other direction and pulled into the parking area. Some more context. I'm not an intimidating man. I'm tall-ish, but I have almost zero muscle and fairly soft features, so there's not much intimidating about me. A terrified foreign woman, her tiny daughter, and my girlfriend parked off a quiet road in a rural location with a not-so-nice-looking dude pulling into where we were. Great. He gets out and is redneck as hell and definitely not friendly-looking. No judgment on the redneck part. I come from a poorer country north of our city, and those are my people, but hopefully that sets a picture. He strolls over to us. At this point, I walk towards him to put myself between the girls and him. He looks at the girls and then me, and asks if he can help. I tell him no, we're just waiting for the assistance vehicle, and tell him we've got it covered. He then says maybe he could stay and wait with the woman and her daughter so we don't have to. I tell him we're happy to stay and thank him, but again, we've got it covered. He kinda just stood there for a while staring at all of us, not really saying anything, giving off mega creepy vibes. After what seemed like forever, another car drove past us and looked out, but kept going. This seemed to startle him. He mumbled good luck and got in his car and drove off. We waited with this poor scared woman and her daughter for almost 90 minutes. Ended up talking a lot, and hopefully we had made her opinions of Australians a little brighter after mega creep. Finally, the assistance vehicle arrived. A bigger dude who definitely handled himself. I asked to see his ID and stuff to be safe, but he was in a car marked by the company, had all his tools, and definitely seemed legit. We gave the lady my number and asked her to text me when she was off safe. She was so grateful to us for staying with her for such a long time. It made me feel good that even if this dude was just a weird looking awkward country guy that didn't mean harm and was really just trying to help, we had still made her feel more comfortable in a strange country. I don't think he was, and definitely believe he was up to no good, but you never know. I did get a message from her to say she was safe, so everything ended well, but creepy mountain dude, let's not meet again. I don't run from threats anymore. I was 23 years old, in grad school working towards my MLIS, and working part-time at the West Valley Library. I wasn't paid much at West Valley, so I applied for a position at the larger Stone River Library System, SRLS, and was hired there. The new position required me to work hours at the Crestmont and Cherry Lane branches, but I continued working at West Valley too. My first shift with Stone River Library System was a Monday night at the Cherry Lane branch. I didn't need much training because I was already familiar with the software they used and worked with a public one, but one of my new coworkers was explaining some of the unique policies this library had when a patron came up and asked where he could find books about World War II. My coworker asked if I could handle the situation, and I said I could. Before the coworker walked away, he jokingly said to the patron, "Take it easy on her, she's new." The patron was heavy set and looked to be in his mid to late 40s. I told him he wanted to look at the 1940s in the adult notification section, and he wandered off, but several minutes later he came back. He said he was having trouble finding the section and that maybe I could help him find the specific book he wanted. I started searching our system for the title he requested. He then introduced himself to me as Jim and extended his hand over the desk to shake my hand. I awkwardly shook his hand and went back to searching for the book. He was acting overtly familiar with me and was very, very talkative, telling me all about himself. Patrons being overly familiar and talkative isn't really unusual in public libraries. Often people come to a library just to have someone to talk to, so we're conditioned to listen to people talk as we work, as long as it doesn't interfere with providing assistance to other patrons. We don't own the title he was looking for, but I told him I could place a hold on it and have it sent here from another library. I placed the hold and told him he would get a phone call when the book arrived here for him. He then told me that the phone number on his account was his home phone number, but he would prefer that we call his cell phone. I offered to change his phone number for notifications to his cell phone number. He said he didn't want to do that because his wife wants calls about her books at home. He then suggested that instead, I could take his cell phone number and call him personally when his book arrives. This was a really strange request. I told him I couldn't do that because I don't handle the items arriving from other libraries, and I'm only here very part-time hours. He attempted a sad puppy dog face and said, "Come on, please, for me." I told him the best I could do was change the phone number on his account to his cell phone. He declined and didn't press the issue any further. He then asked if I could show him to the 1940s in the adult nonfiction. I walked across the library to the 1940s section with him. I don't remember our exact conversation in the stacks, but he was clearly trying to flirt with me, and at some point, he said something along the lines of, "You look so young, but you seem to really know what you're doing. It's hard to believe you're new here." I told him that I'm new to this library system, but I've worked at another library nearby for several months, and I also work in another branch of this library system. He then dropped all pretense of looking for World War II books and started grilling me with personal questions. I sidestepped the questions as best as I could and completely made up the few things I did tell him, but I always had trouble politely disengaging from uncomfortable conversations like this. After, I'd say, 15 minutes, I told him that the library was really busy tonight, and I needed to get back to the circulation desk. As I turned to walk out of the aisle, he grabbed my wrist to stop me, held it very tightly, and said, "You should give me your number." I was completely shaken that he touched me, but I wasn't concerned about being polite anymore. I semi-screamed, "No, I'm not interested," and yanked my arm out of his grasp. I power walked back up to the circulation desk and into the staff room, where I then caught shit from the supervisor on duty for disappearing for almost 20 friggin' minutes. By the time my chat with the supervisor was over, Jim had left the library. I quickly went back to the computer where I placed a hold for him, opened the transaction log, and opened his library account from there. I wrote down his card number, his full name, and his address. The next day was my first day of work at the Crestmont branch. It was uneventful. Thursday, I worked at the Crestmont branch again. When I arrived, the supervisor told me that someone called looking for me on Wednesday but didn't want to leave a message. I had no idea who it could have been and just shrugged it off. Later that day, a coworker told me there was someone on the phone for me. I picked up the call. It was Jim. He said he was just calling to talk. This had the hair on the back of my neck standing up because I realized that he must have been the person who called looking for me yesterday. I told him that I can't just talk to people on the phone while I'm at work and to not call here again. He said if I gave him my cell phone, he would call me when I'm not at work and we could talk. I told him again that I'm not interested and I hung up the phone. The supervisor overheard this. I explained what happened at the other branch and she wrote up an incident report about everything, which she sent to the director of SRLS and the supervisor at all 4 branches. Friday afternoon, the director of SRLS called me at home. He told me that Jim had apparently called all 4 of the branches on Wednesday and showed up at one branch trying to find me and asking where and when I would be working next. The director emailed me a letter drafted by the lawyers that he planned to send to Jim and asked me to read it over to make sure everything was accurate. The letter summarized the incidences from the Sherry Lane on Monday and Crestmont on Thursday, warned Jim that library patrons are not permitted to interfere with a library employee while she is performing her duties, and went on to say, if it were not apparent from the employee's tone of voice, I want to make it clear that your personal attention directed at her is unwanted. It is expected that you do not continue to seek out interactions with this employee. I told the director that I thought this might be a little harsh because I could just be overreacting with the whole situation, but he said that everything about Jim's interactions with me has been inappropriate, and he wanted to stop this in its tracks. I agreed he should send this letter. On Sunday, I work at the West Valley Library. Shortly after the library opened, I answered a phone call and it was Jim. I was so shocked and scared because I never told him that I worked at this library. He said he really wanted to see me, and that if I wouldn't talk on the phone, he would come to the library and we could talk in person. I wanted to be completely clear, so I told him that I was sorry, that if I gave him the wrong impression, but I'm not interested in talking to him on the phone or in person, or ever again at all. He started saying things like, I thought you were a good person. You seem so nice. You shouldn't treat me like this. I said I have to go and hung up the phone. A coworker who overheard the conversations convinced me to file a police report just in case. The police arrived shortly after that, and I sat down with them and went over everything. They told me they were going to stop by Jim's house the next day to speak with him about the situation and see where things stand, and that if I see him following me anywhere, I should call 911 immediately. Monday night, I worked at the Sherry Lane branch again. I was kind of nervous that Jim might come in since he knew I would be working there, but he didn't show up. My coworkers and I walked to the staff parking lot together after closing, and as we approached our cars, I saw that my car's hood was popped. When we got closer, I saw that all 4 windows, plus the front and rear windshields, had been smashed in. There were also dozens of deep dents to the metal panels and cracks and holes punched through the bumpers and other plastic sections of my car. Inside, it looked like someone had poured bleach all over the black cloth seats. Before I could even process what I was looking at, my legs stopped supporting me. I collapsed onto the blacktop, and I immediately threw up. This is the first and only time in my life I've experienced actual panic. My coworkers hoisted me back up and half ran/dragged me back to the library where they called 911. When the police arrived, I told them about Jim. They located Jim's car several blocks away, and inside, they found empty bleach containers, a hammer, and a full set of his clothing. Shoes, socks, pants, underwear, a shirt, and a sweater. When they visited his house, his wife told the police that he was at a local bar watching a football game. The police were never able to locate Jim. As far as I understand, he never returned to his house or his wife. I didn't stick around to find out, though. Over the next 2 days, I quit both of my jobs, dropped out of school, broke my apartment lease, and moved several hundred miles away. But now I carry pepper spray. I'm a black belt in karate, and I don't run from threats anymore, so Jim, let's meet the fuck up. The Birthday Gang. I've had a couple of frightening encounters over the span of my life, but nothing quite as intense as one that took place on a night during my senior year of high school. I've been managing the latest in a series of successive breakups with my high school sweetheart, and I was looking for any reason I could find not to sequester myself in my computer room as I so often did. My friend Mia, who lived in a neighboring community, had invited me over to her place to hang out with her and her brother. I was a socially awkward teenager, and with Mia being a fairly recent acquaintance, I accepted on the condition that I could bring along a frequent companion of mine, my friend, Robert. He was always prepared to hang out, and I could confirm his presence there even before asking him. She was hesitant of bringing another person around, but when I promised her we'd set up some of Robert's fireworks, she agreed. Mia had her own conditions, stressing the importance of calling her to come and pick us up as soon as we arrived at the transit station. I thought it was a bit of an odd request. I'd been to Mia's house before, and it was only a short walk from the station. I didn't think to ask her why, as I was just pleased to be asked to go anywhere. Oh, and you have to bring your fireworks, I told Robert, after grumbling. He got the small cache of fireworks he had stashed away under his bed, and we headed out. Robert and I arrived at the station at around 11, and I did as Mia had instructed, not expecting any invite that late in the evening. My cell phone was left in charge, with enough juice left to let Mia know we arrived. As Robert and I whirled away the time, singing 80s tunes in an off-key rhythm, a black SUV with tinted windows came screaming into the parking area next to the station, swerving wildly and honking before it chewed off into the suburban community we were headed towards. Mia arrived shortly afterwards, and we made our way towards the schoolyard. Robert was still a bit prickly about wasting the last of his fireworks, which was fairly uncharacteristic of him, as he presented himself as one of the most habitually apathetic people that I had ever known up at that point. We set off a handful of fireworks. A few of them were duds, but most of them did what they were designed for, attracting attention. Another black SUV came barreling down the road by the school a few minutes later. This one had a collection of balloons tied to the interior of the car that flew out a rear window, battering against one another as the SUV came to a sudden halt. Mia's face held a look of knowing concern that I didn't entirely understand. "I'll be right back," she told us. I held my breath from a distance as I witnessed a figure hop out of the passenger seat of the SUV and approached Mia. I let out a heavy sigh of relief as their greeting was, while out of earshot, was warm. There was a rapport and friendliness not commonly reserved for foreboding strangers you meet with the hour creeping closer to midnight, and the lights in the surrounding homes growing increasingly scarred. Mia was the type of girl you couldn't help but like. She was bright, talented, funny, and never did much to offend anyone. She treated everyone on equal terms, and a natural byproduct of that is collecting friends of every high school archetype. Some of those archetypes were ones that I was all too familiar with: the jocks, bullies, and bad seeds, the latter of which her district's high school had a notorious reputation for. But at that point in my life, I was already content with the knowledge that the flaring tempers between most individuals of every identifiable clique would simmer with age, but there would always be the select few that never quite got over the thrill of illicit dealings and physical violence. Their behavior would escalate, and they'd step into the criminal lifestyle, a young adult, where their actions become less excusable. I am, and still am, a tiny male at 28 years old, never growing beyond 5'4", an easy target for such a person. I had the reputation of being mischievous but laid-back slacker who could take a punch but couldn't throw one, and I relied on the former trait to diffuse tense situations with people outside of my tribe. It didn't always work, but it allowed me to skate by relatively unharmed for most of my high school career. Mia embraced the stranger in a hug before they finally parted ways. The stranger got back into the SUV and sped off. When she returned, I asked her what that was all about. "That was a friend of mine from St. Francis High. They're out celebrating his buddy's 18th birthday by driving around and beating the shit out of people walking by themselves. You're alright if you're with me, but I think we should probably head back to my place." Fine by me. I'd rather not be party to some kid's twisted adulthood initiation rites as he proves his machoism to his friends while they take turns packing my face in. We arrived at Mia's house, but the mood had turned pretty sour and contemplative as we sat with very little to discuss aside from the obvious. We got about 20 minutes into a movie before Mia's father walked in. Mia, it's 12. Time to say goodnight to your friends. Mia explained the situation, but being an honor student with overly invested parents can sometimes mean bearing the burden of strict rules, one being bed by 12, the other being no safe harbor for teenage boys overnight. Christ, what have we gotten ourselves into? Mia told us there were 4 of the SUVs driving around. She asked us to be safe before saying goodbye and locking the door behind her. Robert and I slowly walked off from the porch and into the cul-de-sac. A disappointing evening, but it happens. I took my cell phone from my pocket to trouble my best friend for a ride, but I forgot I hadn't charged it earlier and the battery had died since. Robert didn't bother to carry a cell phone with him and communicated with a few people he did hang out with over MSN Messenger. We took inventory of what we had left with us before taking off towards a transit station. My pockets were virtually empty, save for my wallet. Robert had a single remaining firework in his possession along with a Zippo lighter. There was a house down the street that I recalled was being renovated with one of those industrial-sized disposable bins out on the front streets. I left inside and re-emerged hefting a 2x4 with a couple of bent nails in it. Robert laughed at the visual. "Call me Buver Pusser Jr., I'm walking small," I cracked. Robert had a Zippo and the firework at the ready. "I'll shoot this right in their fucking faces," he said. If it sounds as we were high spirits, it's because the risk of our situation hadn't quite sunken in yet. We were aware that the transit station would be shutting relatively soon. The trains wouldn't be any help, since this particular station held the final terminal on the line, but the buses might still be active. The neighborhood we started in had enough walkways, bike lanes, and tree cover that we could slink our way through the shadows for a while. We took our time choosing the most secluded and unlit passageways, which in hindsight I realized did nothing to help our nerves. At one point, we came up to an intersecting walkway we were familiar with in the daytime. The passageway ahead of us lit overhead by a single yellow streetlight before fading into a yawning mouth of pitch darkness. We stood there agonizing for several minutes over whether we should find another route or stay the course. Listening for any sound of movement on the other side, we briefly contemplated camping out for the remainder of the night before opting for another detour. The night silence was punctuated every so often by the squealing of tires, shouting, or the sudden accelerating of a vehicle. Then we reached the main road, not only one of the main roads in the area, but one of the main roads on our end of town. From there on was little cover, nothing but houses, buildings, and a large empty parking lot, all illuminated by streetlights that at that moment felt more like the halogen floodlights they shine on escaped prisoners as they rush across the yard to freedom. There was little traffic at this point in the night, so if one of the SUVs did come down that road, we would not go unnoticed, and there would virtually be nothing to stop them from doing what they were intent on doing. We listened for any sign of obnoxious motor revving before we took off across the road and into the parking lot. Less than a minute later, we arrived at the transit station. We quickly checked the posted bus times, but as indicated by the digital clock outside, all the buses had made their final run. We hoped to take shelter in the train terminal, but the doors had already been locked. We'd have to stick to the main road until we made it to the bus trap. The bus trap was our safe haven. What's unique to this bus trap is that it was right under a tightly constructed underpass that divided one community from another. After years of drivers still risking the odds to make their trip shorter, the underpass had also been fitted with added precautions, cement blockades, and a metal gate that only opened for buses. This would increase our chances of making a clean getaway if the birthday boy and his pals sped towards us. Robert and I flinched at every distant sound, unaware of whether it was an ordinary motorist on their way home after a late evening of the assailants that we're concerned with running into. We began to think that maybe we were just overreacting this whole thing. There was a good chance that someone had already phoned the police on them, and they had already taken off to another area to avoid detection. Maybe they had gone home, or better yet, gone arrested. We let our guard slip as we reached our old junior high school, starting to think that the worst case scenario we were preparing for was already behind us. That I was carrying a cumbersome piece of wood, only to look like a jackass. That Robert was still armed with a firework and a Zippo for nothing. This is where I remember the set of walkways leading straight through the community towards an elementary school, which was right by the bus trap. I had walked it plenty of times before, and with the streetlights spaced out every 60 feet, we'd see them from a mile away, but they'd see us too. What we were greeted with instead were long expanses of burnt-out streetlights, another sparsely lit tunnel of shadows and nightmares. We started down the path, because what other choice did we really have? Robert flickered his Zippo open as much as he could, still careful to conserve his lighter fluid in case an actual confrontation that walk didn't last long. The oversensitive back porch lights helped to fill in the dark points, but there it reached the point where it was getting too dark, where you couldn't see your hands in front of your face, and the accompanying sounds of snapping twigs and branches was enough to signify that we might just want to get the fuck out of there. We stood paralyzed for a moment, imagining the birthday boy and his friends waiting behind the shadows. The pump was bloody. Then, sensing it had just been like an animal, we returned to the quieter neighborhood areas. There may be more room for us to see them, but less of a risk of getting cornered. We quickly made our way along unfamiliar streets and joined up with the final walkway to see it, the elementary school, and in the distance, the bus trap. We were so relieved to see our safeties in sight, walking at a relaxed pace and feeling foolish for turning a 20-minute walk into an hour-long ordeal. We passed through the elementary school grounds and began walking the fully lit street down to the bus trap when a black SUV came whipping around the corner on the left side, nearest to the bus trap, balloons from the rear window streaking backwards from the velocity as the vehicle itself accelerated. There's no way they didn't see us. Shit, I shouted at Robert as we doubled back towards the elementary school and rounded the corner. We both had to think fast, as the road we were on was only a 15-second drive at the recommended speed. We ran down the street along the elementary school, but was no cover to be found. I heard the engine grow closer to us within seconds of turning onto the street. We were out of time, and I pointed the only cover I could find, a side yard fence, not accompanying front fence, no attaching hedge, nothing. Robert and I lied down on the grass against the fence, long like boards and stiff as corpses, our respective weapons at the ready. I've never felt my heart pump as hard as it was at that moment. Tightly gripping the 2x4 while I watched Robert position the firework and uncap the Zippo as if this was gonna do anything. We were really fucking chumps. The SUV slowed to a roll as it turned the corner, the headlights reaching down the road as they went searching for us. Convinced that they wouldn't find us in the car, they parked. They parked at the edge of the property right fucking next to us. The headlights of the SUV were peeking out just beyond the fence. We were beyond fucked. 4 doors opened within a few seconds of each other, feet kicking up gravel as the birthday gang murmured to one another and began all searching for us. I noted at least 4 sets of footsteps and a couple of indistinct voices. We were definitely outnumbered. My mind flashed through all the numerous times I've been pushed around at school, laughing good-naturedly as I refused to fight back in futility. I knew everyone who did this to me, and this humanized me to them enough that they never pushed it too far. These people didn't know me. They weren't aware of the bullshit persona I assumed, the odd guy who was alright with pain. They didn't know I pretended to think I was funny. These fuckers wanted to hurt me. They wanted to hurt me, and they wanted to hurt my friend. This is it, I thought. This is the moment you quit being such a coward and earn your own fucking respect. I gripped the 2x4 tightly enough to dig tiny wooden splinters into my hand and just listened to my heart thump as my blood boiled with whatever rage I could summon. I would only have a slim opportunity to surprise them before they take us down, and I hoped that Robert would get his fireworks off soon enough to buy us some fucking time. If I was only going to get in one strike, I was going to make sure it connected. As if some force miraculously knew what we were up against, I heard a voice say, "Fuck it." A few seconds later, the car door slammed shut, the SUV backed up, pulled a U-turn and drove off. All the courage I had to muster, everything I was prepared to fight with in a losing battle that I never knew I had in me, all slowly settled back into the deepest regions of my body. Robert and I walked the quiet back route to the bus trap. We arrived at the underpass and casually walked through it. We both took a moment to look back into the other community that we had spent so much of our time in without issue, now in recognition of what we had just narrowly avoided. It felt like the type of thing a person should do. I wish I could say that this near brush had a transformative effect on me. that it forced me to re-examine my passive tendencies and open up a new chapter in my life where I stopped letting myself be treated like everyone's rag doll. It didn't. Not necessarily. My one takeaway from this experience was that despite my many previous assumptions about my fight or flight response, it proved that in a rare moment, when I'm backed into a corner, I'll be prepared to stand my ground. Until then, birthday gang, let's not meet.